people think that they don't always have the right, or they're being difficult if they rule people out on the basis of red flags. And either they feel lucky that they found someone, or that they judge themselves for being too fussy. Red flags are red flags, and all of us not only have the right, but frankly, the responsibility to recognize them. Are there always red flags in relationships that just may not work for us? That's the question, because everyone's like, red flags, identify the red flags, and it'll all be good, right? Are there always red flags, or is it ever possible that it's not all about the red flags, it's just that a relationship just doesn't feel good to us? We want there to be red flags, right? We want things we can hang our hat on. Say clearly, there it is, there it is. That's a red flag. That's the problem. That's the issue. Then we can articulate it. Look back and say, yep, they came late. They drove too fast. They got drunk the first time they met my parents. They interrupted me on the first date. They're always on their phone. They were really entitled in the restaurant. It takes them 5 days to return some text messages. They kept trying to brag and be better than my friend's boyfriend. They made fun of my shoes. Listen, you may have even justified the red flags at the time, but when you talk about it later, hell, even if we don't love it as it's happening, there's a certain relief. These red flags feel concrete and real. The problem is that there aren't always red flags. Sometimes it's fuzzier. Sometimes you just don't like someone. It's nothing you can put a finger on. You may even think like, you know what, this person was on time. They were kind of respectful. They asked decent questions. They were not rude to the waiter. They were nice enough to my friends. It's none of that. It just doesn't feel right. That scenario is actually harder. It's more difficult for many survivors of narcissistic abuse to navigate. Red flags, that feels legitimate. Yep, yeah, got it, makes sense, in my face. Something I can see, I can discern, I can disengage, and I have reasons, and I can say them out loud to myself, and that's great. The problem is that sometimes it just isn't, they aren't there. The red flags are often more behavioral, stuff you can observe, and stuff that, yes, we probably should have picked up the first time or the first month or the first year. But no one teaches us this stuff. But I just don't like this, I'm not comfortable with this person, that could happen upon meeting a new possible friend, or at a job interview, or a first date. For survivors of narcissistic abuse, this can be challenging. We want substantive red flags, not something hazy that we should listen to in our body that tells us to slow down. I know some of you may be listening to this and saying, well, Dr. Ramani, you're kind of being mean. Maybe you meet someone and they're having an off day, or they're shy, or they're from a different culture. That's all true. I'm not saying like the first time you're like, don't like you, and you cut and run. I am saying that the thing that's hard for survivors is to listen to ourselves. Then not listening to ourselves because we long ago stopped trusting ourselves. That's the challenge here. And what it can mean is that what we do is we keep pushing and pushing through discomfort when we're survivors, but without these hard and fast red flags, like someone screaming at a person on the freeway, we may feel that we need to talk ourselves out of ourselves. Don't. If you feel uncomfortable about a scenario, situation, or person, sit with it. Don't be rude. Don't run away. Don't be abrupt, but sit with it. Don't judge yourself. Recognize that you bring a history to the conversation you're having with this new person, and that things that make us uncomfortable may sometimes be reminiscent of old dynamics that unsettled us. They may be subtle bits of invalidation. It may just be fuzzy, and it may literally be happening at the level of intuition, instinct. I actually had this experience recently. I felt like I was with someone who I actually really like, I thought, and we were dancing different steps and different beats. It was not at all an indictment of the person. It wasn't red flags. But I was depleted after the encounter, and I paid attention to that sense of depletion. I unbraided what I was feeling, and instead of judging myself or the other person, frankly, I saw it for what it was. Was this a person I would want to get into a business with? No. Was this a person I would want to travel with? No. Was this a person I would want to see occasionally from time to time and maybe share a few ideas with? Sure, but it wouldn't be a priority for me. Discernment isn't a yes, no, black, white, in or out. It's an assessment of what feels right. All human interactions are a dance, and we can learn to pay attention to what they feel like for us. What makes this so hard, because it feels sort of easy, and yes, some folks out there are able to say, oh, you know what? I wasn't feeling it. I actually think it may be easier to use this mindset with dating than with other kinds of relationships like friendships or workplace stuff. But what makes it hard is the input of other people saying, give it a chance. For survivors of narcissistic abuse, the give it a chance can play on the really entrenched self-doubt, a sort of, who do I think I am, sort of kind of pushing back on this person because it wasn't completely easy or comfortable. Mindfulness means taking a minute to be present with yourself, checking in with yourself, feeling a situation out. How does the situation feel in your body? Are you able to bring your true self into it? So I'll give you a contrast. I recently met someone where my intuition was spot on. I really enjoyed my first conversation with this person. I found myself in my stride. I was comfortable. I was funny. I could tell the difference between those two encounters. And again, there were no red flags with that other person, no clear signs, just me feeling what I felt. The fuzziness is something many survivors talk about. They'll say, yeah, there's no red flags, and I sort of forced myself to make it work. And then after I got over myself, I stayed in it, and then the narcissism and the trauma bonding and all the rest of it happened. So the red flags model doesn't always resonate, but this ephemeral sense of, I'm just not feeling it, that's there. Listen, every day we have to encounter, deal with, work with, talk with people we don't feel great with. That's life. We may need a minute after those encounters to just replete, have to double down to make sure we communicate clearly, may even blame ourselves for these moments. That's not to say that all of these encounters that don't feel good or easy are toxic, not by a long shot, but they become great lessons on how to discern and listen to yourself, to move at a pace and with boundaries that feel good to you, and recognize that you don't always have to make it work with everyone. I'll tell you, those 2 episodes, and they were separated by about a couple months. In the one of them, I actually felt literally, and it wasn't even cold wells, I felt physically cold. I felt very physically rigid. I remember my eyes were more wide open. I almost looked like this. Like if anyone saw me, they'd be like, is there a wind blowing on this woman? But with this other person, when I met them, there was a lot. I was moving. I was almost dancing as I talked to this person. I was laughing. I was throwing my head back. They were actually both really smart, clever, interesting people. What that was about, I don't know. And listen, it was a very interesting lesson to me because after the first encounter, again, perfectly nice person, I was wiped out. After the second person, I was energized. So I think that we can learn a lot from the not glaring red flag situations. It's a way to give ourselves permission to recognize, no, there's not something wrong with me, but there's something about certain situations that bring something out, and to take each of these situations and learn from them. Drop this one in the comments. How many of you were introduced to the narcissistic person you got into a relationship with, or business relationship, whatever? But how many of you were introduced to the narcissist that came into your life through friends or family? Drop that one in the comments. It kind of sucks when it happens, right? So people you trust, friends, family, anything, they introduce you to someone, right? And they're like, oh my gosh, this is a great person. You have a similar business interests, or you'll get along so well, or whatever. Then the family members or the friends are people you actually respect and know. And you're like, yeah, of course I'd like to meet this person. I trust you. And I am sure that look at these comments, I'm going to see this is lots of you. This is such a difficult one. When other people introduce us to someone, and it doesn't even have to be romantic, it could be anything, we kind of assume, because we trust this person, that they sort of vetted them. So we may actually let our guard down. Trust you me, I have lived through this. I hate to say it, on both sides. And everyone I know has at least one narcissistic person who came into their lives through the gateway of other people they trusted. So like I said, this is a trust one. And I'm both equally guilty. I've introduced people to narcissistic people. I felt so bad. And I've been introduced to narcissistic people by others. Like I said, I get this on both sides. Now, this is especially hard if these are long-term friends or family members, like I said, where you have a good relationship, where you've traditionally trusted them and still do. But when they introduce us to someone, we may think that this person has sort of been pre-screened. Well, not so fast. So why does this sometimes, and more often than we'd like to think, end badly? Well, the trickiest element of antagonistic and narcissistic personalities is the shape-shifting, to be one way with new people, one way with intimate partners, one way with friends, one way at work, one way with more superficial relationships. Healthy people, on the other hand, are very consistent in how they relate to others. People with more shallow personality styles often can shift, put on different masks to get their needs met and get their validation needs met. So your friends, especially if they know this narcissistic person as sort of a lighthearted, fun, charming, charismatic friend, or the narcissistic person is somehow beholden to them. For example, maybe your brother is the narcissistic person's boss. They may not see that whole full person. So as a result, they may not be in a position to know what it would be like to be in a relationship with this person they're introducing you to, or to work with this person. The danger of antagonistic personalities is that their big closet is full of masks. And if you haven't had that experience with them, for example, dating them, you may not know that about them. But we like to think that our friends will have our best interests at heart. So they tell us, hey, I know this really cool person you should meet. And so you may even ignore red flags or that icky intuitive feeling you get in your gut when you meet them, because your friends or other people you respect and trust tell you, hey, this person's cool. And you think, well, if my best friend from forever, who I respect, thinks that this person is cool, and I'm kind of thinking this person's a little wonky, then maybe it's me and my sensitivity, and I'm sort of being a little red flaggy. Be careful of self-gaslighting, right? But so you go with it, right? You meet the person and your friends are happy for you, and yeah, aren't they such a great person? Or you may say, yeah, sure, yeah, this person's really the right person to do this business idea with that your family member recommends, but you still are having the red flags, and the red flags may continue to mount up. And now it's bigger than just your gut. Patterns you're seeing may even be concerning: lies, manipulations, gaslighting, invalidation, verbal abuse, whatever it is. And you may now be in a real conundrum, because you may not want to say anything to your friend or whatever trusted person introduced you. And worse yet, your friend may not believe you. They may say something like, I don't know, I've known them for years and they've always been great. Are you sure that you aren't saying something to kind of mess things up, or you're not misreading the situation? So with that doubt thrown in, you may actually stick it out longer, endure more abuse, and suffer more in one of these situations than you might if the introduction had not been made by somebody that you already knew. But you may endure more in this relationship, more because people you trust are signing off on this person, but you are feeling uncomfortable in this relationship, yet you stick it out. And then when things don't work out, that can raise new issues, as it may result in tension between you and the person who introduced you to them. The friend who introduced you may have valued the friendship or the relationship that they had with that person, who it's becoming increasingly clear has an antagonistic personality. And there's even a risk it could put a wedge between you and that friend of yours. Or you may also be angry at your friend or family for introducing you to someone who is kind of doing some emotional and psychological harm to you. It doesn't always have to end badly. And some, in fact, I'd say many friendships can get through. But this is only going to happen only if your friend doesn't gaslight you and is able to see the difficult patterns that you're pointing out and not defend themselves and question you or question what happened to you. But you may have also been looking sideways at your friend saying, do you even know me? Like, what were you thinking, believing that this would be a good match for me? And again, that could undercut the relationship that you were in with your friend, because you may actually think, wow, it doesn't even feel like my friend gets me. Now, once you have been through this enough, you will always trust your own gut. Like I said, I've been through this multiple times on both sides. When I've had people I trust be a bridge to toxic people, or I've introduced people to toxic people. Listen, I'm a trauma bond poster child. So I often wanted to believe that other people were smarter than me, or I wanted to please them. So I would often go along with the introductions that people make for me. This has actually happened to me a lot more in professional situations, and let me tell you, I have gotten into some really big messes. In some cases, the original friendship, the person who introduced me to the toxic or narcissistic person, we did fine, we got to the other side, but in others, the trust eroded and the friendship sort of died on the vine. But in all cases, I do admit feeling quite angry, and in the cases where I've brought a narcissist into someone's life, I think I'll feel guilty about that till the day I die. So even if people you really care about and who you believe care about you make this kind of an introduction, still keep your red flag detectors up. Keep your gut fully on and pay attention. If it doesn't feel good, don't get lost in making excuses. Things like, oh, but my best friend thinks they're great. You know you. And if your friend doesn't understand why you might have had to step away from the person you introduced them to, then they really weren't a healthy friend to begin with. We are the only detection systems that work for us. If you say yes to please the friend or to please the introducer, always be aware you may be entering a risky space. Just because someone you know introduces you to someone doesn't make it safe. So here's my question. Did any of you have the experience in your narcissistic relationship where you didn't see any red flags? Like, wait a minute, can it be narcissistic relationship without the red flags? If you had that experience, drop them in the comments and let's take this one apart. So imagine not seeing red flags. Narcissistic thing is all about red flags, right? In a way, because so many people are so harmed by these relationships, we want this narcissism thing to be a formula. We want to feel confident that we see the red flags early on, and that when we spool the story backwards, like, oh, of course, all those red flags are so clear. So that means that next time, the belief is if I could see them backwards, that means next time I'll see them forwards, and I'll get out early, and I've got this narcissism thing wired, and red flag, and I got this. Now, when some survivors look backwards and unpack those red flags, they feel foolish. Things like, oh, how couldn't I have seen that? I am so lame. I'm codependent. I didn't even know those things were red flags, on and on. However, more and more, I'm seeing people who actually didn't really see that many red flags, even after the fact, right? They're like, no, I don't see them. Sure, they may have said, yeah, maybe there was this little thing here or there, but they're like, I'm stretching. In the macro, they'll say there were very few, or maybe even no red flags. And as they tell me their stories, I'm like, I get it. I don't see any either. Now, obviously, if we look for something hard enough, we could see it. But I'm going to tell you there were so few red flags in some of these stories. I don't know in real time that they would have ever seen what was happening as red flags, because they really weren't. And in these situations, you may be wondering, well, if there were no red flags, what went down? Well, something finally does go down, as it does in narcissistic relationships. And it's often a betrayal or a double life kind of thing. You find out they were cheating, or you find out they were doing shady business stuff or shady stuff with family money, but all the while they were lavishing their lives, or even you, with gifts and money. You may find out they're already married, that kind of thing. So there's no red flags. But when things finally hit, it's like a 9.0 earthquake. Using that, I live in California, right? And unlike in the eastern part of the United States, where hurricanes are a big issue every year, you can forecast a hurricane to within 12 to 18 hours, so you all can prepare. Now in California, we know that when the big one hits, we're screwed. There is no preparation. The ground will shake. Everything is going to collapse. A lot of people are going to die, and that's going to be that. They talk about having early warning systems, maybe minutes or seconds, certainly not long enough to get to safety, maybe enough time to sort of brace yourself, maybe pack up a pet or get out of the way of heavy furniture that could fall on you, but you're certainly not getting grandma's china out of the house. The no red flags of it all is almost like a California earthquake scenario, right? The only thing you know is that living in a place with shifting tectonic plates means that the whole thing can fall apart in a minute, which is kind of the risk maybe of any relationship. Anytime we open up our hearts, we run that risk. But the other option, lock the door and never love anyone, well, that seems a bit bleak, doesn't it? And I'm a pessimist, and even I think that's bleak, right? So how could it be a situation where there's no red flags? Okay? Like I said, let's talk about a few reasons. I hinted at some of these. One is that them having a double life means that they're actually able to regulate their tension by having their needs met all the time. So narcissistic folks are masterful at compartmentalization. That's why they are such good cheaters and liars. While they're with their other person or their one-night stand, they aren't thinking about you. Interestingly, when they're thinking about you, there's a lot of time they may not be thinking about the other person. They really can do that. It's chilling, but true. So as a result, kind of all of their needs are being met all the time. They are successfully running whatever hustle they're running, their needs are being met, and so as a result, you may not see the kinds of rages and tantrums and sensitivities that often pop up as red flags. If they do have another life or other aspects of life that you are not privy to, then it may mean actually that your relationship is running pretty damn smoothly until they get found out for some reason the other life pops out, but that may not happen for months or even years. The second way that you miss these red flags is you don't spend that much time with them. For example, this could happen in a long-distance relationship or a relationship in which you're both very busy. As a result, it's hard to get sort of a full look at them. And if they see you infrequently, then those encounters may kind of have a love-bombed vibe for a long time. And you don't see the red flags, maybe, until you start spending more time together. The third reason, number 3, is not all red flags are created equal. Some are a bit pink or faded red, while others are neon red flags. But those more subtle red flags may only be seen based on your history. For a person, for example, may have a history of being cheated on, a subtle behavior in a partner, like that person taking their phone into the bathroom or locking it into a nightstand at the end of the night, may ring as a red flag, while for someone else, provided that everything else in the relationship is going smoothly, it may not register. A fourth thing is that these red flags may not pop up for many months, maybe even years. Now, in most cases, red flags show up before the third date. In some, they may not show up until 4 or even 6 months in. So when they do, and things unravel fast, a person may wonder, how the hell did I get 6 months down the track and not see any? Well, maybe there were none to see. Some narcissistic folks can actually keep it together for that long, in some cases even a year. Maybe they're milder or lower grade narcissists. Whatever the reason, it means that when the red flags show up, things may unravel fast. I remember talking with a woman once who told me that things were red flag free until they got married. And almost literally after the reception, the wheels came off. In retrospect, she realized he was sort of emboldened by the legality of it all. And he believed that she was so traditional and she was very Christian in her faith that she would never get divorced. The difficulty is that we have this assumption that every narcissistic relationship has the same architecture. Love bomb, devalue, discard. Now, most do. It's like anything. There's that modal, average presentation. But then there are lots that don't conform to that. The challenge then becomes, if there were no red flags and then the entire relationship goes to hell really fast, people may become really confused and think, well, maybe this isn't a toxic relationship because there were no red flags, even though once they come in pretty fast and furious. Or people may think, I must have missed them. Maybe not. Because when there are really virtually no red flags early on, one thing we know is that in some ways, when it blows big. Because the contrast between what seems like a lovely, fun relationship and then a bunch of red flags showing up all at once can feel like a dam breaking. Versus when there are gradual red flags and it doesn't feel good. So when it gets worse and worse, you aren't as shocked. And that contrast of no red flags going all the way to nightmare leaves survivors even more prone to self-blame, confusion, and self-doubt, because they'll think there had to have been there because things went so badly. How did I miss them? There are no universals when it comes to antagonistic, toxic, and narcissistic relationships. There are, however, probabilities. But for those of you who are scratching your heads and wondering, how did this relationship go so wrong so fast? What the hell did I miss? Maybe you didn't miss anything. And I am so sorry if that happened to you, because a gradual disaster feels much more manageable than having your life turned upside down all at once. So, here's an interesting thing with red flags. I'm beginning to see that some people don't even think they're worthy of getting to identify them and do something about it. So let's talk about this idea of feeling worthy of seeing red flags. So just give me some background, okay? Years ago, I was teaching a class on health and psychology, and I asked the students to describe what would comprise a healthy lunch or a healthy dinner. And they yelled out answers: chicken, quinoa, other multigrains, vegetables, salad, drink some water. Okay, great, that's an A+ answer. I then asked them, how many of you ate something like that for dinner last night or lunch today? Nobody raised their hand. So they knew what it was supposed to look like, but they didn't do it. We may know things, but that doesn't mean we live them. The vast majority of smokers know that cigarettes are bad, and they still smoke. Most of us know that processed sugar is bad for us, and we still indulge, etc., etc., right? For my students in that class, it may have been money or time, so they couldn't purchase that dinner or afford the ingredients or had the time to cook it. They told me that. They said, yeah, we know, and we can't, and I get that, right? So that takes us to this idea of red flags. I was again recently speaking to a group of people, and I said to them, hey, give me the adjectives that describe a healthy relationship. And they yelled it. You could be yelling them right now too. Empathy, trust, respect, loyalty, kindness, compassion, perfect. I then asked them how many of them were currently in relationships like that. Very few people raised their hands. Most of us know what red flags look like. We know that yelling, or chronically being late, or being passive-aggressive, or lying, or manipulating, or having bad boundaries, or having contempt for us, or laughing at us when we feel bad, that's just not okay. So just like that chicken breast, quinoa, broccoli dinner, we know that's good for us, but we still don't eat it. We know those red flags are bad for us, and yet we still let them pass. We even need to take one step further back. We need to keep in mind that some people do not even know that red flags are actually red flags. If since you were very, very young, you were raised with contempt and devaluation and manipulation and gaslighting and being told and experiencing that you are not enough, when those patterns come up in adult relationships, you may not even know these red flags are a thing. I see this in folks who come from narcissistic family systems. For example, they may start dating in late adolescence. They don't know what happened to them in childhood was narcissistic abuse. They might even think it's kind of normal. And then that those late adolescent, early adult relationships they enter into often have all the red flag bells and whistles. But if they don't know that those things are an issue, that those patterns are unhealthy, a young person can rather easily transition into a toxic relationship at an influential age, which can set the tone for future adult relationships or devolve into a really abusive space that holds a person back at an age when being held back really has implications for the rest of your life. But why do we, when we know about red flags and we recognize them, why do we let them pass? When the red flags show up, why don't people do anything about them? There's more than a few answers, right? People feel they need to give a person benefit of the doubt or second chances. Maybe there's enabling involved. Maybe it's about not understanding narcissism. But one of the reasons that gets forgotten is that some folks don't even think that they have the right to call out the red flags. It's like the opposite of privilege, especially people who come from narcissistic families where red flags were just flags or just a regular day, or people who may have less privilege for other reasons in society. In essence, the internalized message becomes, who am I to feel like I have the right to be all uppity about red flags? Maybe people believe that manipulation, rage, lying, maybe that's as good as it gets for someone like me. So recognizing them or distancing myself from them is not something I really have the right to do. And if I do, I'm going to end up alone. That mentality, who do you think you are, is very much a messaging that we hear in narcissistic family systems and relationships. Who do you think you are? Do you really think you got what it takes to go to college or move away or get that job? Whatever way, in these families, your wings get clipped. And that can extend to, who do you think you are, thinking that you can pay attention to these red flags and walk away from a relationship? And then you can experience that as, if I'm being so fussy about these red flags, I may end up alone forever. Maybe someone like me doesn't get to do that. Maybe this is all I get. I do think that for many people, lesson number one is that they do not understand what the red flags are and why it's so important to identify them and act on them early. Number two, that's a step further, is that people think that red flags are something that can be changed. And it's just sort of the growing pains in the early phase of a relationship. Not true. And number three, people think that they don't always have the right, or they're being difficult if they rule people out on the basis of red flags. And either they feel lucky that they found someone, or that they judge themselves for being too fussy. Red flags are red flags, and all of us not only have the right, but frankly the responsibility to recognize them. It's not enough to just educate people on what red flags are, like those healthy meals. To really use the red flag knowledge in a way that benefits you means that you have to be willing to do the deep dive and understand how indoctrinated you have been to accept red flags, and then do the even deeper dive to unpack the messaging that may leave you feeling as though you don't have the right to act on them. If everyone out there who experienced red flags acted on them, even if it took a few months to do it, I would be out of a job, which I say, yay, love that. Everyone would then see them these days, but everyone does see them. Very few people act on them. I have been hearing so many stories about people who thought, yep, my instincts told me like what's happening here is just not cool. I don't like how this feels. I know it's not right, but, and then the excuses come, including devaluing yourself. I have yet to see a story where a person ignores a red flag that turns out well. I wish we taught this to children, to pay attention to red flags and step away. But instead, we only teach children to endure and persist when they're in uncomfortable situations. Until we teach children to trust their instincts, and then we teach them what red flags are. And as long as narcissistic families keep working their toxic harm, lots of people may know what red flags are, but truly not believe that they have the right to act on them, even when they know what a healthy plate or a healthy relationship looks like. It's really important that if you sense them, to act on them. Otherwise, it's the equivalent of saying, I know what a healthy dinner looks like, and then sliding into a big old pile of fast food. I'm going to answer a question that so many people give me, say to me, ask me when they're talking about their narcissistic relationship. Dr. Ramani, how could I be so stupid? How could I have been so stupid as to fall for this? Before we get there, answer that question, please hit that subscribe button. Join this community of people who are narcissistic survivors or just people who are interested in the topic. Hit that bell to get notifications. You'll know every time we put out a new video. So let's talk about it. How could I be so stupid? That sentence is a refrain of so many people who have gone through narcissistic relationships. And I don't just mean romantic relationships. I mean family relationships, workplace relationships, even friendships. How could I have been so stupid? That's what they say. And it's not even said with any kind of a light heart. It's really from a place oftentimes of shame. Seriously, how could I have been such a stupid person? I made such a mess. How couldn't I have seen this? Now that I see it, it's clear as day. Let's talk about the layers of how a person gets here. We can start by the basic parameters of narcissistic abuse. How is it designed? It's designed to leave you confused. It's designed to leave you full of self-doubt. It's designed to leave you anxious, depressed, helpless, hopeless, vigilant, aroused, traumatized, you name it. But it's definitely something that leaves you, more than above all else, confused as heck. And so what happens is when you're so confused, the last thing you're going to do is say, well, this is a mighty toxic relationship. I need to get out of here. No, your reality has been questioned so many times that you don't even know if you have any idea of what's right. Many times you'll say, maybe this is my fault. Maybe this is my problem. It's as though I'm doing all of this. So the idea that you would even think that need to get out of this is completely co-opted by this idea that I don't even know which way is up. I don't even know what color the sky is. And increasingly, your narcissist holds the keys to your own reality. Not exactly the best conditions to get clarity. That's piece number one. Piece number two to me is information and lack of information. As you know, I made this YouTube channel from no other place than to say, you know what, people need this content, so we're just going to start throwing it out there in good faith, and if it helps some people, it helps some people. It is helping people, and I can see that. And given, the number of you that are tuning in, clearly there's some curiosity about this, but you didn't know. And many people had said to me, if I had read your book or someone else's book or watched videos on this, I would have known this and I would have gotten out. Or if my therapist had just been willing to call this out and say, this guy's a narcissist and is not going to change, instead of spending all this time on communication and finding different ways to say things, I might have gotten out. A lot of this is just about information. How are you supposed to do something if you're not given a template? The reason you're able to add 2 + 5 is not because you were born knowing how to add. A teacher once taught you this. The reason you know how to read is because your parents or a teacher taught you to read. The reason how we know how to do most things is because someone taught us, because we were given information. We ain't born able to do much else than to eat, go to the bathroom, and cry. Everything else, we're taught. Nobody taught you this. If I had my way, this would be built into the curriculum of every school in the world, and it would also be a required part of how we parent our kids, which is going to be hard if your parent's a narcissist. But the fact of the matter is you didn't know. So to call yourself stupid for not knowing, so for example, if somebody just now handed me a book, I don't know, written in a language I don't speak, I don't know, like gave me a book written in Hindi, I don't read Hindi, then I'd say, this is a beautiful language to look at, I can't read a word of this. Does that make me stupid? No. It simply means I wasn't taught this. Perhaps with time, if I was taught it, I could read it, make sense of it, and then I wouldn't be stupid anymore. But you're not stupid. You just didn't know. But because so many people in narcissistic relationships, a key dynamic is shame. These relationships are designed to shame you. Why? Because shame is such a key dynamic in narcissism. Remember that narcissism, in fact, some theorists out there would argue that narcissism is entirely a shame-based disorder. Their deep, deep insecurity means that they're driven entirely by putting this face to the world, and because they chronically live in fear of being called out by the world or finally being seen for what they are, they're constantly living in a place of shame. And shame, it often comes back at them because they're behaving badly. They get called out on it. That shame leads to more bad behavior. It's all a threat to their ego. And their ego is constantly, constantly caving into that shame, shame, shame. So what else do narcissists do? They project. So you're constantly having their shame projected on you. You're a fool, you're so foolish, why are you this, why are you that? It's always them projecting stuff onto you, and shame is a big part of that. And if you came from a family where shame was a major part of how you were raised, how things were talked about, how behaviors were enforced, you may already have a tremendous vulnerability and a tendency to shame. Throw that narcissist in there and their projection and your confusion, you're just sort of a ripe proving ground for all of that shame. And then, as a result, you not only feel stupid, you feel shameful, and you feel foolish for not having seen this. Another reason people keep asking themselves this question, how could I be so stupid, is the isolation that is such a big part of narcissistic relationships. You're isolated from everybody, right? There's no place to get validation. In fact, many people, by the time they finally enter a therapy room with me, have been enduring this for many years, sometimes decades. And they come in and they tell me their story, and they're so broken, and they're like, yeah, that sounds like narcissism to me. And they snap up and they say, what? And I say, yeah. And I thought that's why they came in. They're like, oh, I just wasn't sure what it was. And I say, no, let me break this down for you. But it is really that sense of how long they've been alone with this. And they said, oh, I saw one of your videos and you seem to be talking about what I was going through, but then I thought, let me confirm it because maybe it wasn't that. And they come in and it's clear as day. So that isolation means that you don't get validation, you don't get support, you don't get people saying this isn't okay, or the people around you may be your narcissist enabler, you may be your narcissist flying monkeys, maybe your narcissist people who gaslight by tribe, but you may even be sucked down further into the confusion. So how would you know? Are any of us ever going to be confident enough to say everyone else is wrong, I'm the one who's right? In fact, in one of my books, I cited a classical psychological experiment done by a guy named Solomon Asch. And Solomon Asch basically, and I wish I had a graphic, presented a card with 3 lines on it. And one was clearly much longer. They were labeled A, B, and C. And I think it was line B. That was much longer than the A for sure, and C was sort of in between the two. But B was clearly the longest. And Ash had a circle of people, I think like 9 or 10 people, and they'd pass the card around, and each person was asked to say, please say the longest line, and they would say it out loud. There were 2 people in the circle, though, were what we call confederates. They were people that were sort of in on the experiment, placed there by the experimenter. So each people would say, B is the longest, B is the longest, B is the longest, B is the longest, then they'd get to the confederate. And the confederate would say, C is the longest. What do you think happened with the next person? Even though B was clearly the longest, you know what they said? C was the longest. That kind of sort of giving in to social pressure is a classical part of the human psychological experience. And you can make you understand then why, especially when you're being gaslighted by tribe and everyone around you is a narcissist enabler, that even when you sense this doesn't feel right, when everyone around you is saying she's a great gal or what a great guy or you come from such a great family, you're like, huh? Idiot, maybe I'm the crazy one. You start feeling like you're in one of those horror films. But you're not the idiot and you're not the crazy one. This is all only going to stop when more and more and more of the world get wise to narcissism, but unfortunately the narcissists still make the rules. But in your own individual lives, you can take stock of this. You can become aware of this and know you're not stupid. It takes not just courage, but often blind faith to say no. I'm right, and I don't care that everyone else said it's line C. It is line B. I know what I'm talking about. And when you finally do give in and call this out and maybe even leave the relationship, it's very possible that people around you will start leaving you too. Well, if you're going to be like that, if you're going to call him out, if you're going to be so disrespectful of your family, then to heck with it, out with you. You sometimes have to tolerate being outed, being left, being abandoned, being mobbed, smear campaigns, the whole 9 yards, if you're going to call this person out. If you call this person out, you may lose a marriage, the financial protections, the companionship, or even risk the estrangement of your children. These are high stakes. So for anyone to call themselves stupid for not seeing this, nothing could be farther from the truth. Frankly, I think that the day when a person gets awoken to the pattern of narcissism in their life, it's two things. It's liberating and it's terrifying. It's liberating because maybe it's the first day you can stop blaming yourself, but it's terrifying because many times it's a call to arms. And you know that that call to arms is going to be complicated. You're going to lose people. It's going to be scary. And now you're probably going to have to face that narcissist's wrath. That's not stupidity. That's you trying to figure out a way to survive. So before you throw yourself under the bus and use that term, realize there's nothing stupid about it. It's an awareness, it's a wake up, it's something very few people knew about until they did. It's why I do what I do, because I worked for this in this area for years, and I'm going to be frank with you, I'm shocked that for pretty much the first 15 years of my career, no one talked about this, or the people who did, it was very, very much on the fringes, and I thought, we got to get this out there. More and more people need to hear about this. So I hope you can listen to this and recognize that even if you stayed for 50, 60 years, even if it's taken you decades to figure this out with your family, your friends, whomever, you're not stupid. You're just finally letting some really tough information absorb in and slowly but surely letting go of the toxic narrative the narcissist handed you and replace it with one that is more authentic and true to the goodness that is you. Thanks again for tuning in. No, you're not stupid, but you'd be a bit of a fool if you didn't subscribe to this YouTube channel. So please hit subscribe, join this community, hit the bell for notifications, and we look forward to showing you our next video when it comes out.